Welcome back to Bird Feeding with Kurtis. Our second episode is a really exciting one, and I'm really excited to dive right into it. We're going to be talking about what to expect this winter at your bird feeders, and this year is going to be a bit of an outlier. So, we'll talk a bit about that and how we can best get the most out of this really fun Finch-y winter we're expecting. So, I'd like to just start out by saying thank you to everybody who watched the first episode. I was shocked how many people tuned in, watched the whole video, and commented. The comments and the likes, I can't even begin to describe how important that is to the growth of our channel. And I mentioned this in the first episode. There's nothing I want to do more than educate people about bird feeding. I want to make an entire life about it. So thank you so much for showing up for me. I'm going to keep showing up for you as well, and we're going to make this a really cool thing. So thanks for being part of the ride. Thanks for being here early, and let's dive into today's episode. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the Finch forecast. Now, the Finch forecast was originally reported on at the end of September, but it got some mainstream kind of activity in the last week, and the experts are predicting a really Finch-y winter this year. And what that means is, generally speaking, a lot of our winter species that arrive at our feeders tend to be boreal species, which come from the northern boreal forests that run from Alaska all the way to Newfoundland across, North America, mostly Canada. And what we see at our feeders in the winter tends to be highly, and I should speak, this is North America based, but our winter activity is highly dependent on the food availability in the boreal and interior forest regions. So there is a group of people that collect data samples, primarily looking to see the food availability in these pockets of the boreal forest. And they can pretty accurately predict finch and other species movement based off food availability. The last time we had a big eruption, which is birds leaving their wintering ranges due to food collapse, was 2020. And if you were feeding the birds in 2020, you probably remember, hundreds of siskins and red poles and crossbills and really fun birds that spice up the winter bird feeding and, maybe hurt the wallet a little bit too because they come hungry. So we have some evidence popping up and some reports coming that we're going to be expecting a similar style eruption this year, which is really cool. And what tends to be the primary driver of these birds' movement is a lack of cone crops, seed crops, and berry crops. So because of this year in the east in particular, so let's say Saskatchewan east, they're having pretty much failure across the spruce trees as well as the berries. So we've got waxwings, nuthatches, finches. All these birds are desperately already moving west and east and south in search of extra food. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to dive into the actual report. It's not my report. I'm just sort of giving my interpretation of it. And then at the end, we'll conclude with sort of how we can get the most out of it and what it all means and the recommendations that I would give for you at your feeders. Also, these reports tend to be very Eastern driven. So if you're in the West Coast or in areas where these reports don't really, get mentioned, I'm going to try to fill those gaps based off of, some data hypothesis as well as kind of, past experiences when these eruptions happen, because sadly, just most of the data points that they collect for these are Eastern driven. So here in the West, for various reasons, it's quite difficult to predict what's going to happen year to year. So I'm going to start off And I'm just going to read this report, and then we'll go from there. So, this year's finch forecast indicates that we may be heading into one of the most active finch winters in recent memory. According to the latest report, seed and fruit crops across much of eastern boreal forest have failed or significantly underperformed. Birch, alder, spruce, and tamarack crops are all running low, which means many of our winter finch species will need to move south out of their traditional winter range to find food. So that pretty much summarizes what is going on. We are seeing very, very poor or failed crops in the most critical regions across North America. When that happens, we're going to see billions of birds on the move. So this is substantial stuff. And because finches follow food, not temperature, that's a key point. These shortages are the engine behind what we call an eruption year. The expected movers. Based on the crop failures, we can expect substantial southward movement from several species. Common redpolls are forecasted to push heavily into the Great Lakes region, the Northeast, and the northern tier of the US. We've been seeing this since late August. Redpolls have been showing up to feeders across the eastern North America belt for months already. So there were some warning signs. This was already on the move. Pine siskins may show widespread, unpredictable movement, especially where conifer seed availability is patchy. Siskins are funny birds. They don't follow the traditional path. They are kind of nomadic. They move in pockets. When there's large spread food shortages, you can expect huge numbers of pine siskins at the bird feeders. And this year, there's been some evidence since even the spring. Where they're going to show up, you just never know, because pine siskins, they're unique. They do their own thing. They don't follow trends. Purple finches are predicted to move significantly farther south than usual. Evening grosbeaks could appear in larger numbers, especially east of the Rockies. And in the New York region, they're having massive outbursts of spruce budworm, and grosbeaks, evening grosbeaks, are the first indicator of that. So if you're in the New York region, good chance you're going to be seeing tons of evening grosbeaks, and that's they're fun birds. Crossbills are a mixed picture. Some areas suggest movements, but strong western cone crops may hold flocks in place. So this is our first sort of data point into the West. And what we're seeing in the West, unfortunately, if you're wanting big activity at the feeders, is as of now, the cone crops for the third year in a row are pretty strong. A lot of birds from the east may come west in search of those crops. They may deplete much faster than usual. So the West, we're not ruling out good activity in the West, but it may be a little bit delayed. And Bohemian waxwings, my favorite, and pine grosbeaks, driven by low mountain ash and berry crops, may wander more broadly across their ranges, bringing them into more communities than usual. Now, an interesting phenomenon happened here in Kamloops last year. Since I've been observing more than 10 years, we did not have a single Bohemian waxwing move south into our region, when typically we see flocks of, I'm not kidding, thousands in micro pockets in our little town. And last year, the berry crops were so good, they didn't even have to move. So I'm hopeful they'll be on the move this year, because I love watching the Bohemian waxwings land in the backyard and eat all of the juniper berries. It's so much fun. What the forecast does not address well, this is kind of the part that requires a little bit more interpretation. So the western half of North America remains a major gap in forecast reliability. This isn't because nothing is happening. It's because Western cone crop monitoring is sparse. So there's just not a lot of people that are available to monitor these really remote regions. It's very tough to collect data on forest food availability. Terrain varies enormously. So of course we've got the Rockies, we've got really dense terrain up here in the Pacific Northwest, and it makes collecting data very difficult. There's just not the manpower or the financial capability to run this sort of stuff. Seed crops can be strong in Alaska and Yukon, but weak in BC or the Rockies. We're seeing from reports that the Alaska and Yukon is strong this year, but we just don't know about BC and the Rockies yet. And that is a huge, pocket. So we're not quite sure. Movements in the West often occur in narrow pulses, and Western finch populations can disperse over vast areas unnoticed. Crossbill movements in particular depend on hyper-localized cone success. Pine siskin movements in the West are historically tied to failures in whitebark pine or interior spruce crops. And we don't have a clear picture of how those trees perform this season. So what does this mean for the West? While the East may see widespread finch movement, the West is more unpredictable, and it makes it tricky. If the northern cone crops are strong, many birds may stay closer to the boreal. If interior BC, the Alberta foothills, or the Pacific Northwest experience region-specific failures, we could see sudden pulses of pine siskins, grosbeaks, or even crossbills moving through. Early winter storms could trigger more movement than the crop data alone predicts. In short, the West remains a wild card. We could see trickles, bursts, or even a delayed wave in the winter. So what does this all mean? It means that in the East, the northern US, the mid US, as well as mid Canada, you're going to see some activity almost certainly and very quickly. In the West, there's a good chance. We just don't know, and it may come later. The comparison to past eruption years. So if we want to look back to 2020, which is the last time we've had an event similar to this, and sort of try to take some information from that to, predict what could happen this year. This year resembles the major finch movement in the year of 2020, often referred to as the superflight. The biggest difference is that this year includes significant fruit crop failures, which bring berry-dependent species, especially waxwings and pine grosbeaks, into the conversation more strongly. Historically, large western eruptions occurred when interior conifer crops failed, but that pattern isn't as clear this year. That's why the East is being highlighted, while the West is left somewhat open-ended. So it's a murky situation. It's really clear on one side of the continent, and it's kind of, we're not sure what's going on in the West. So how bird feeders can prepare. Whether you live in the East, Central, or Western regions, preparation makes all the difference. So I've got a whole bunch of information here as far as how to prepare, but really, this comes down to bird feeding fundamentals, and there's many ways to prepare for eruptions, and you don't necessarily want to hold off. You want to have the right feeders, the right food, and the right setup, because these eruptions happen fast and they tend to really ride out the whole winter. So things to expect: large numbers of birds at the feeders, which may create a large number of competition. So if you're a single bird feeder user, this may be the winter to consider adding some supplemental feeders. Now, it's also going to be really, really important to use the proper seed this winter. We do not want cheap hardware store mixes. We're going to want high quality seed. In particular, we're seeing conifer crop failures. So we use sunflower chips to mimic conifer seeds. So when we have conifer failure, we're going to attract or expect conifer eating birds. So sunflower chips are going to be crucial. Getting the ratio of sunflower chips to, the other ingredients like your nuts and suet is going to be big. So I would probably recommend having a feeder out that is just going to be stocked with sunflower. One with a lot of perches, if not multiple. This is going to be really crucial because these finches are going to be coming in large numbers and the competition is going to be heavy. I would definitely have a mix available. I would want a high quality mix of sunflower chips, peanuts, and tree nuts. Those are going to be really good options to have stocked in the feeders as well. And suet is, suet is always great in the winter, but it's also misunderstood. Suet mimics insects, and that's why it attracts your insect eaters like woodpeckers and other birds like starlings, blackbirds, magpies, other mixed insect eaters, even sparrows. However, birds are hardwired to switch their foraging in the winter to look for things that are naturally available, like seeds, nuts, and fruit. So suet popularity often dips in the fall and the winter because birds are not really looking for it the same way they're looking for the things that are naturally available. When the things birds are looking for, like conifer seeds and berries, vanish naturally, they really look for them in supplemental sources such as bird feeders. So having this all planned out is pretty important. And the variability of this upcoming winter is going to be pretty interesting. How this all plays out is going to be kind of fascinating to sort of keep track of and reflect on when the season comes to an end. So I think that is pretty much a pretty good point to kind of wrap up this podcast. We've given you a rundown on the report, what to expect. We can give more specific advice to what to look out. So if you're sitting here right now thinking, I really need to know what to do or what to prepare or what to get, leave a comment and I'll curate a plan for you. Comment your situation and your question, and I will give you the best advice for that. So we'll get you all sorted out. I also would love to know what you're seeing in the yards right now. Has there been a change? Is it much the same? Are your feeders quiet? Are they getting busier? What are you seeing at the feeders? Because the regional variability is going to be pretty massive here. So I'm curious. Let me know where you are and what you're seeing. If you have any questions, I've got an interesting episode planned for episode 3. Now, this may change, but I want to talk about my process, how I deal with customers, because I have a unique approach where I deal with people individually. I do not have generic one-fit-all advice. When someone comes into my store, I find out everything I can about them and their setup and their goals and their wishes, their desires, and the mistakes they've made in the past, and I find the perfect solution for them. So I'm going to kind of dive into that process in the next video. And I just want to emphasize how exciting this time is. For me, as a bird feeder, we've got this great winter coming up. We've got the podcast rolling, and the times are pretty fun. So drop some questions for future episodes in the comments as well. So that's going to wrap for today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it. See you next time.